For 41 days, a small gray dog came and sat down 2 feet from my boots. Always the same time, always the same square of stone. On the 42nd day, they sent a car to take him away, and I did the one thing a man in my uniform is never, ever supposed to do. I moved. Let me back up. You need to understand the gate first, or none of the rest of it will land. My name is Owen Marbury. I was 26 years old that autumn, 3 years into the Queen's Own Foot Guard, 2nd Company. Amberley Gate, west side of Caverlyn Palace, in the old part of Ellesmere, where the streets still curve the wrong way because they were laid down before anybody thought to plan them. If you've seen a photograph of Brenhold, you've seen my gate. Black iron, gold tips, a stone arch worn smooth on one side where 200 years of shoulders have brushed past it. Tourists stand at the railings from 9 in the morning until dark. They hold their phones up. They wait for you to blink. Here's what nobody tells you about standing still. It isn't the standing, it's the thinking. You are on your feet for 2 hours at a stretch, 20 minutes at the post, 10 minutes marching the beat back again. Your bearskin weighs more than you'd guess, and it sits on your skull like a hand pressing down. Your collar is stiff and it saws at your neck if you're new. Your boots, God, your boots. Mirror polished, and inside them your toes are doing this constant small dance because if you lock your knees you will faint, and if you faint on camera you will be a video with 4 million views by supper. So you learn the tricks. You roll your weight heel to toe so slowly no one sees. You clench a calf, release it. You count things, pigeons, buses. The gold tips on the railings, there are 142, and I've counted them so many times I could tell you which one has the chip in it. And you don't speak. Not to the man who calls you a toy soldier. Not to the woman who reaches through the bars to touch your sleeve. Not to the boy who stands there for 40 minutes trying to make you laugh, going redder and redder until his mother drags him off. You are furniture. You are a rule with legs. That's the job. That's what I signed for. Queen Rosalind was 83 that year. She'd been on the throne longer than my father had been alive. Small woman, shorter than you'd think from the coins. She wore the same green coat for a decade because she liked the pockets, and she walked the gardens every afternoon, rain or shine or ice, with the stubbornness of someone who has been told no by nobody since 1970. At about 10 minutes past 4 most days, she'd come out through the garden door on the west side, walk the gravel path, and pass under the arch about 6 feet from wherever I was standing. She was never alone. There was always a dog. Not the big polished kind you'd expect. A little wire-haired terrier, gray around the muzzle, one ear that stood up and one that had given up years ago. His name was Pim. He was 11. He walked with a small hitch in his back left leg, and he had a habit of stopping dead in the middle of the path to sniff something invisible, and the Queen of Brenhold would just stop and wait, hands folded, like she had nowhere else to be, like she wasn't holding up a country. Every afternoon, right there under the arch, she'd take a biscuit out of the green coat's left pocket, break it in half with her thumb, give him one half, then the other. And every afternoon, without looking directly at me, she'd say the same 3 words to whichever poor soul was frozen at attention beside her. Don't mind us. That's all, never anything else. Just don't mind us, as if she was apologizing for being in our way. I heard her say it perhaps 300 times. I never once answered, not aloud. I want you to hold on to that. It matters later. She died on a Tuesday in October. Not dramatically. In her sleep, at the country estate at Sallow Green, with the windows open because she couldn't stand a stuffy room. The bells started at 7 in the morning and they didn't stop for an hour. I remember I was shaving. I remember I stood there with half my face still white with foam, listening, and the strangest thought came into my head, which was, the path. Not the crown, not the funeral, not the enormous machinery of a country changing hands. I thought about the gravel path at 10 past 4, and the small dog with the collapsed ear, and I thought, Who's going to wait for him now? I was 26. It's a stupid thing to think, I know that. The crowds came, of course they came. Within 2 days, the railings outside Amberley Gate were 3 deep in flowers. Cellophane, ribbon, cards written by children in enormous careful letters. It rained on the 3rd day, and the whole lot went to mush, and the smell of wet lilies and rotting stems got into my uniform and stayed there for a week. We stood in it. That's the whole story of a guard. The world falls apart and we stand in it. I did 9 hours in the rain the day of the lying-in state. My feet were pulped. End Pryor, my mate, 2nd Company, from a fishing town up north, laughed like a drain, could imitate any officer in the regiment. End went down on the 8th day, just tipped forward like a felled tree. 2 men had him under the arms before he hit the stone. The crowd gasped. Somebody filmed it. He was back on the beat the next morning, white as milk, furious about it. That's what those weeks were. And then on the 11th day, the dog came back. I was on the post, 4 in the afternoon. Gray sky, the kind of light that makes everything look like an old photograph. I heard the claws first. That little scratchy tick-tick on the flagstones that a dog's nails make when they haven't been clipped in a while. He came out from the garden side, through the gap where the old gate doesn't quite meet the wall. He walked with that hitch in his back leg. He stopped in the middle of the path and sniffed at something invisible. And then he came under the arch and sat down, 2 feet from my right boot, on the exact square of stone where she used to stand. And he waited. I couldn't look down, I want to make that clear. My eyes were forward on the railings, on the tourists, on nothing. But you don't need to look at something to know it's there. I could feel him. I could hear him breathing. Dogs breathe loud when they're old. He sat for 11 minutes. Then he got up and went back the way he came. I stood there for another hour and 50 minutes, and I don't remember a single thing about it. He came the next day, and the day after. Always at 4, always the same square of stone. Some days he'd sit facing the garden path, watching the door she used to come out of. Some days he'd turn and face me, and I'd feel his eyes on the side of my leg, and I'd think very clearly, I have nothing for you. I don't have a green coat. I don't have a biscuit. I don't even have a voice. Mrs. Dowd from the kennels came for him at first. She'd walk down at 4:30, apologizing to nobody in particular, scoop him up and carry him off with his legs dangling. She said he wasn't eating right. By the 2nd week, she stopped coming. She just let him go and let him come back on his own. I asked her about it once, off duty, in the yard behind the barracks. She was a big woman with forearms like a docker, and she'd worked in that palace for 31 years. She said, he's not looking for her, love. I said, what's he doing then? And she said, he's keeping the appointment. She said it like it was obvious, then she went back to work. I thought about that sentence for a long time. I still do. Here is where I have to tell you about the rules, because otherwise what happened next will just sound like a man being unkind, and it wasn't that. A guard at Amberley Gate does not move except by drill, does not speak except on command, does not eat, drink, scratch, sneeze if he can help it, or acknowledge any living thing in front of him. There's a reason. The reason is that the moment you become a person out there, you stop being a symbol, and the whole thing comes apart. If I smile at one child, then the next 50 children want to smile, and the 50 after that, and then somebody's father is climbing the railing to get a better shot of me smiling, and then somebody's got a hand on my rifle. The stillness isn't for us. It's a wall, a polite gold-tipped wall. So when a small gray dog sat down beside my boot every day at 4 in the afternoon and waited for a woman who was never coming back, I stood there and I did nothing. Nothing at all. For 11 days I did nothing, and every one of those days took something out of me that I haven't fully got back. The tourists noticed on day 16. It was inevitable. A woman in a red anorak spotted him, said something to her husband and lifted her phone. Then the man next to her lifted his. Then 20 people. By the following week there were people arriving at 2:30 to get a spot at the railings, just to see him walk out and sit and wait and go. Somebody put a video online with music over it and it went everywhere. There were newspaper columns. There was a cartoon in the Ellesmere Herald, the empty arch, the little dog, one line underneath. I won't repeat it. It made half the country cry into their breakfast. And people started leaving things at the railings for him. Chew toys, biscuits in little bags, a knitted blanket. One woman left a single dog biscuit every morning for a month, wrapped in tissue paper, and never once tried to speak to anybody about it. We weren't allowed to touch any of it. It piled up. The cleaning staff took it away at night. Now, the thing I did. It was nothing. I want you to understand how small it was, because I've had 4 years to think about it, and it still seems like nothing to me. It rained hard in the 3rd week. Proper Ellesmere rain, coming in sideways off the river, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and follows your spine all the way down. Pim came anyway, 4 o'clock, hitching along the gravel, soaked through, that one ear flat against his skull. He came under the arch and went to his square of stone. And the thing about that square is that it's just outside the shelter of the arch, 6 inches out. In the rain, it's a puddle. He sat in it. He was shaking. He was 11 years old and his coat was slicked down to his ribs, and he sat in 3 inches of freezing water because that was the appointment and he was keeping it. Behind me, under the arch, dry as a bone, was the strip of flagstone where a sentry stands. I was standing on half of it. I moved my left boot, 4 inches, maybe 5, slid it across, heel first, so slow that if you'd been watching me you'd have thought you imagined it. It took me the better part of 2 minutes. That's it, that's the whole crime. Pim looked at the dry stone. Then he looked up at me. Then he got up, walked the 6 inches into the dry, turned around 3 times the way old dogs do, and lay down against the side of my boot. I could feel him through the leather, the heat of him, the shivering slowing down. I stood there for 1 hour and 40 minutes with a dead Queen's dog asleep on my foot and my eyes fixed on the 142 gold tips of the railings, and I did not move again. Nobody saw, or if they did, nobody said. He came into the dry every day after that. He never needed to be shown twice. Sergeant Halloway found out in the 5th week. Halloway had 22 years in. Gray mustache. The kind of man who could tell you were 3 grams over on your buckle from across a parade square. He'd been a guard at Amberley when he was my age, and he'd stood beside that woman and her dogs the same as I had. He called me into the guardroom. Didn't sit down, so I didn't either. He said, "There's a photograph." He turned his screen round. Somebody with a very good camera lens from very far away had caught it. My boot, the dry stone, and a small gray shape curled against the polish. I said nothing. That's what you do. He looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he said, and I remember this exactly, because his voice did something strange in the middle of it. He said, "In 1998, I stood that post in a hailstorm, and she came out and stood beside me for 11 minutes because she said it seemed rude to go in." He turned the screen back round. He said, "Did anybody see you move?" I said, "No, Sergeant." He said, "Then you didn't move." And that was the end of it, and I got out of that room and stood in the yard for a while, and had to work quite hard at breathing normally. Things were changing inside the palace by then. They always do. A country doesn't stop. The new king, Edric, her son, 59 years old and looking about 80 that autumn, was doing what new kings do, which is signing things and shaking hands and being photographed looking capable. Caverlin was being packed up around him. The green coat went into an archive box. 31 rooms were emptied and inventoried and closed. And somewhere in all of that, Somebody had to decide what happened to a small gray terrier with a bad leg. It should have been a private decision, a family thing, the kind of thing that gets sorted out over a cup of tea by people who are exhausted and grieving and not thinking especially clearly. But there were 4 million people watching that gate at 4 in the afternoon. So it wasn't private, it was never going to be. The announcement went out on a Thursday. In the flat gray language, these things always come in. The late Queen's dog, Pym, will in due course be relocated to Fenwarren House, in the care of Her Majesty Queen Vivienne. Queen Vivienne, Edric's wife, the new Queen Consort. 54 years old, a tall, quiet woman who had spent 30 years being photographed standing slightly behind other people. Nobody had ever quite worked out what to make of her. She wasn't warm on camera. She wasn't cold either. She just held still and endured it and went home. There had never been any great love between her and the old queen as far as anybody could tell. Not hatred. Nothing so interesting as that. Just 2 women, 40 years apart, who'd been put in the same photographs for 3 decades and had never once been seen to laugh at the same time. And now she was taking the dog. You have to understand what happened next, because I watched it happen from behind a set of railings, and I couldn't say a word about it. The country turned. Not all of it, but enough. By Friday afternoon, the word had settled on it, and the word was claim. She's claiming the dog, as if he were a chair, as if he were a title. The columns wrote themselves. Why her? That dog belongs to the nation. Somebody dug up a photograph from 9 years earlier where Vivienne was standing about 4 feet away from Pym and not looking at him, and they printed it, enormous, and let people draw their own conclusions. There was a petition, 60,000 names by Saturday. And the crowd at Amberley Gate got bigger, and it got quieter, and it changed. It stopped being people who wanted to see a dog. It started being people who wanted to stop something. They started coming with signs. Let him stay. He's waiting for her. And every day at 4 o'clock, a small gray dog with a collapsed ear came hitching down the gravel path, walked past 200 people holding their breath, sat down on the dry stone against my left boot, and had absolutely no idea that he had become the most argued-about animal in the kingdom. And said to me, in the barracks, "They're going to do it at the gate." I said, "Don't be daft. They'll do it inside, back entrance, quietly." N shook his head. He was cleaning his buckle and he didn't look up. He said, "They can't. If they take him out the back like a sack of laundry, that's the picture forever. They've got to be seen doing it kindly." I sat on my bunk and thought about that. Then I said, "So they're going to walk out to my post." And N said, "Owen, they're going to walk out to your post." The order came down on the Wednesday night. Terse, the way orders are. Thursday, 1600 hours, Amberley Gate, a car would come to the inner court. The kennel staff would be present. Her Majesty Queen Vivienne would be present. Additional men on the railings. Expect a crowd. And then at the bottom, one line that Halloway read out twice slowly, looking round the room at each of us in turn. Sentries at the gate will maintain position at all times. Under no circumstances will any member of the guard interact with the animal. He folded the paper. He looked at me for slightly longer than he looked at anybody else. He said, "Marbury, say it back to me." And I said, "Maintain position at all times, Sergeant." And he said, "Good lad." And he went out and shut the door, and I sat on the edge of my bunk with my boots in my hands, and I understood, completely, in my bones, in a way I had never understood anything before, that at 4 o'clock the next afternoon I was going to have to choose between the only thing I'd ever been good at and something I couldn't even put a name to. I didn't sleep. At about 3 in the morning I gave up trying, and I sat by the window looking down at the dark shape of the arch, and I thought about a small woman in a green coat breaking a biscuit in half with her thumb. "Don't mind us." And I thought I never answered her. Not once in 300 afternoons. Thursday came up cold and clear. That's the part nobody who watched the footage ever believes. They all remember it raining. It didn't. It was one of those bright, hard November days where the sky is the color of the inside of a shell and the light comes in low and lays everything bare. I was on the post from 2 o'clock. By 2:30, there were 400 people at the railings. By 3, there were more than 1,000, and they'd closed the top of the street, and there were officers on foot walking the line saying the same soft sentence over and over. Keep back from the rails, please. Keep back from the rails. Nobody was shouting. That's what got into my chest and stayed there. Big crowds are loud. Big crowds sing and heckle, and somebody always has a whistle. This one just stood, 1,000 people wide, and made a sound like a held breath. End was on the far post, 30 feet away. I couldn't turn my head to look at him, but I knew he was there, and I knew he was scared too, and that helped more than I can say. The signs were still up. Let him stay. Somebody near the front had brought a child's drawing, the arch, the dog, a green coat with nobody inside it, and had taped it to the railing at about the height of my knee. I stared at the gold tips, 142. I counted them twice. It didn't do a thing. At 20 to 4, the inner court gate opened and the car came in. Not a big one, a dark saloon unmarked. It stopped in the courtyard, well back from the arch, and nobody got out of it. Mrs. Dowd came down the gravel path with a lead over her shoulder and her face set like a woman on her way to identify a body. She had the old lead, the worn brown one. I'd seen it 300 times. She stood by the wall about 10 feet inside the arch, and she waited, and she didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. Behind me, on the far side, I heard the crowd's held breath change pitch, and I knew the Queen Consort had come out. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to tell this the way the newspapers told it. They told it like this. The cold woman in the black coat came to take the nation's dog, and a young soldier stopped her. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and stranger and much sadder than that, and I'm one of about 6 people alive who saw it from close enough. She came down the gravel path on her own. That was the first thing that was wrong. There should have been 3 people with her, an equerry, a press officer, somebody carrying something. There was nobody, just a tall woman of 54 in a plain black coat, walking down a gravel path in front of 1,000 silent strangers, with her hands empty at her sides. She stopped about 8 feet from me, inside the arch in the shade. And she stood there and she looked at the empty square of stone where the sun was hitting it, and she didn't move, and she didn't speak. And out beyond the railings, 1,000 people watched a woman look at a paving slab. I could see her from the corner of my eye. That's all a guard gets, the edge of things. Her hands were not steady. I saw that. She had them pressed flat against the front of her coat, one over the other, the way you do when you have decided that they are not going to shake in public and they have decided otherwise. And I remember thinking, with a kind of surprise that shamed me, she's terrified. At 2 minutes past 4, the claws came tick-ticking on the flagstones. I heard the crowd hear him. He came out through the gap where the old gate doesn't meet the wall. He stopped in the middle of the path and sniffed at something invisible, and 1,000 people made a soft sound like a wave a long way off. He came under the arch. He walked straight past Queen Vivienne of Brenhold without so much as raising his head, went to the dry stone by my left boot, turned around 3 times and lay down. And she watched him do it. I have thought about the look on that woman's face for 4 years. I've never got to the bottom of it. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't anger. It was the face of somebody who has just had a private thing confirmed in front of 1,000 witnesses. Mrs. Dowd came forward with the lead. And the Queen Consort lifted one hand, about 3 inches, and Mrs. Dowd stopped where she was. Then Vivienne knelt down. In the archway, on the stone, In a black coat in front of the whole country, a 54-year-old woman who had spent 30 years standing 4 feet behind other people got down on her knees on the cold ground about 5 feet from my boot. Pim opened one eye. She put her hand out, palm up, and she waited. He didn't come. She waited longer. Her arm must have been aching. She stayed there, hand out, saying nothing, and the dog looked at her and did not move, and out beyond the railing somebody started crying loudly enough that I could hear it. And then she said, very quietly, in a voice pitched for nobody but the animal, and I only heard it because I was 5 feet away, and I have replayed it in my head every day since. She said, I know she isn't coming. And Pim put his head back down on his paws. I want to explain what happened in me at that moment, and I don't think I can. Something to do with the fact that she said she isn't coming out loud, when I've been standing on that stone for 6 weeks not saying it. Something to do with the fact that she was on her knees on cold ground, and nobody was going to help her up. Something to do with 1,000 people behind me holding signs that said "Let him stay," aimed at the back of a woman who was trying to do the last kind thing anybody could do for her mother-in-law, and being hated for it. Or maybe it was just that she couldn't reach him and I could. Because he was against my boot, and I was the only person in the kingdom he'd stayed for. Sentries at the gate will maintain position at all times. Under no circumstances will any member of the guard interact with the animal. 3 years. 3 years of not blinking, not smiling, not flinching when a man screamed obscenities 4 inches from my face on a Saturday night. 3 years of being a rule with legs. I moved my left boot. Backwards away from him, 4 inches, then 8, slow the way I'd learned. And I broke the line of my body and I bent, properly bent, at the waist, in full kit, in front of 1,000 cameras. And I put my right hand flat on the dry stone, palm down, and I slid it under that dog and I picked him up. He weighed nothing. That's what I remember. 11 years of arguments and columns and petitions, and he weighed about as much as a bag of sugar and he smelled of wet wool. I straightened up. I took 2 paces forward off my post, off the flagstone, out of my life as I'd understood it. And I held him out to her. She was still on her knees. She looked up at me, and her mouth moved and nothing came out of it. I said the only thing I have ever said on duty. I said, "Don't mind us, ma'am." You can hear it on one of the videos. The one filmed from the north corner if you turn it all the way up. You can't hear the words. You can just hear that somebody spoke. But she heard them. Because those were her words. Her mother-in-law's words. 300 afternoons of a small woman in a green coat apologizing for existing in a doorway. And Vivienne, the cold one, the one who never laughed in photographs, she made a sound. One sound, not a word. Then she took him out of my hands and she stood up with him against her shoulder, and she turned round and she walked back up that gravel path, and Pim put his chin on her collar, and 1,000 people who had come to stop her stood there and watched her go with their signs down at their sides. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that sort of moment. Somewhere near the front, a woman started clapping and stopped because it was wrong. And I stood in the middle of the archway, off my post, in the sunlight, with my hands empty and my heart going like a drum, and I did the only thing there was left to do. I marched back to my flagstone. I came to attention. And I stood there for another hour and 50 minutes, and I did not move again. They charged me, of course. Holloway had no choice and I didn't want him to have one. Breaking position on ceremonial duty, physical contact with an unauthorized, I forget the wording, something about an animal. I stood in front of 3 officers in a room that smelled of floor polish and I said, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," and I did not offer one word in my own defense because there wasn't one. I'd read the order. I'd said it back to my sergeant. And then I'd done what I did anyway. That's not bravery. Let's be honest about it. Bravery is a man going through a door not knowing what's on the other side. I knew exactly what was on the other side. I just decided I could live with it, and a lot of men have made that trade for a lot worse reasons. 14 days confinement, loss of pay, off ceremonial duty for 6 months. Holloway walked me out afterwards. In the corridor he stopped and looked at the wall for a bit. He said, "Was he heavy?" I said, "No, Sergeant, he was nothing at all." Holloway nodded slowly, like that settled something. Then he said, 22 years I've stood that gate and I never once had the chance." He straightened his cuff. "Get your kit squared away, Marbury. You look like a bag of washing." And he walked off down the corridor and I stood there, and I'm not ashamed to say what I did next. The letter came in March. Plain envelope, no crest, my name handwritten. Inside, a single sheet and a photograph. The photograph was old. 15 years, maybe. 2 women in a garden at Sallow Green, both in Wellingtons. One of them small and old and laughing so hard she's got a hand on the other one's arm to stay upright. The other one is tall and about 40 and she is laughing too, her head right back. A woman caught completely off her guard. I'd never seen Vivienne laugh, not in 30 years of photographs. I suppose that's the thing about cameras. They only ever get the bits people can't stop them getting. The letter was 4 lines. I'm not going to give you all of it, but the last 2 I will because they're not mine to keep. She wrote to me in the summer when she knew. She asked me to take him because she said I was the only one who would understand that he wasn't a dog. He was the last of her afternoons. I have never been able to say that to anyone. Thank you for making it unnecessary. That's all, no signature, just an initial. I've got it still. It's in a tin under my bed with my father's watch and my grandmother's rosary and 3 other things that would be worthless to anybody else on earth. Pym lived another 2 years at Fenwarren. They say he took to walking the East Lawn at 4:10 every afternoon, and that a tall woman in Wellingtons walked it with him, and that on the days when she had 4 engagements and a state dinner she walked it anyway, and made 300 people wait. Don't mind us. He died in his sleep in a warm kitchen with his chin on somebody's foot. I heard it from Mrs. Dowd, who heard it from the man who drove the car. That's how everything real gets around in a palace, never through the front. I stood the gate for 4 more years. Then I went home to my mother's town and I learned to fit windows, and I'm very happy, and my daughter is 3, and we have a dog who is an idiot. People still recognize me sometimes. Not often. It was a long time ago and my face was mostly hat. They always ask the same thing. They ask, "Weren't you frightened, standing up to her in front of all those people?" And I never know how to answer it, because it means they watched the whole thing and they saw none of it. I didn't stand up to her. I stood with her. For about 4 seconds in an archway, 2 people who'd spent their whole lives not being allowed to speak. Here's what I've worked out in the years since, fitting windows and thinking too much. They tell you that discipline is what's left when the feeling goes out of you. Stand still, say nothing, be the wall. That's backwards. I stood in the rain for a woman I never spoke to. I stood in the flowers when she died. I stood while an old dog sat in a puddle keeping an appointment with a ghost, and I stood while a country decided a grieving woman was a villain because her face doesn't do what faces are supposed to do. The stillness was never the point. It was just the shape the love had to take because the love wasn't allowed a voice. And every so often, somewhere in a life, the whole thing tips, and the only way left to keep faith with everything you've been standing still for is to move.